I'm going to try Rogue Show. Pronouns are he, him, from South Carolina, and wants to dispute my position on philosophical naturalism. Probably have to make some clarifications on that, but I don't know if you want to go first or if you want me to.
Okay, so first, I just want to, before I clarify, I would love some clarity on your position.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so like my position, at least on when we're talking about like this like a metaphysical view of being naturalism and not just like a methodological view, the way that I'm taking this is that it's kind of like an abductive form. So if I'm going to lean towards any position, or the position that I'm going to lean towards the most, it's going to be metaphysical naturalism. And the way that I go about that is comparing theoretical virtues with other views. So we take the data, maybe we think that the universe had a beginning, and the theist thinks that the universe had a beginning, or the non-naturalist or whoever, and we compare that data. And so what I want to end up saying, without going into the entire type of dialectic, is that my view is that when we look at all the data, metaphysical naturalism seems to be, at least from my view, the view that's the simplest, that explains the data. So it has least commitments, it has less axiomatic commitments. It has less predicates that it has to define. It has less foreign ontology, less kinds of entities that it's committed to. And if I'm postulating a theory that's supposed to explain the data, I don't want dead weight, and I don't want idle, like an idle wheel, right? So the view that I'm comparing it to always seems more complicated and doesn't explain the data. So my view is just based on an abductive method. I think it's more probable that metaphysical naturalism is true because it's less commitments, and it gets more explanatory depth out of the commitments that it takes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And that's
it's trying to be a more humble position and not saying, oh, I deductively can prove it, or it's just trying to say, look, when we compare the data, given what we have, this is the view that I think wins the Occam's razor battle.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where I come out on it too, Rogue Show. I think JMike explains it very, very well. So
so you're a metaphysical naturalist. Mouthful.
It's a view I lean towards. I do want to preface, like, I'm very sympathetic because I like philosophy. I'm actually really sympathetic. Philosophy of mind's my favorite, so I'm really sympathetic to other views. I don't find them to be like theism, atheism exclusive. I feel like there's compatibility with the views. So I'm very open to non-naturalism. I have a lot of friends that are non-naturalists. So I'm not sitting there saying like, oh, I'm so convinced. It's just, I think it edges out. I think it's just a simpler theory. The weakest form I'll say is that they both equally explain the data. I have less commitments, so shave off the extra stuff. Or the strongest form of the argument, I explain more data and it's simpler, right?
Yeah.
I guess so
does that make sense?
Philosophical, yes.
Okay.
So is philosophical naturalism? Does philosophical naturalism state that? Does philosophical naturalism state that nature is all we have, or am I oversimplifying it or getting it wrong?
Well, I mean, like, we could do the philosophy thing where it's like, well, what do you mean? And I think I get what you're saying. My view is that the natural sciences exhaust natural reality.
Yeah.
That's the view I lean towards. I'm not saying I'm absolutely committed 100%. It's the view that I lean towards, the view that I think is more probable. Yeah.
So, so you're looking, okay, so you're looking hard to, I guess, to try to steel man this.
Sure.
I mean, I agree with you I agree with you. I don't have any quarrel. I don't have any qualms with your position.
Okay.
I just want, because I guess my little dispute with philosophical naturalism is the claim that nature I'm not saying this is your position. I'm talking about the claim that this is all
there is.
Naturalism. Yeah, or the natural world is all there is, because that's
Sure.
If I could,
that's a positive.
Yeah, if I could jump
That
in
is
real
a,
quick, Rogue Joe,
thing, yeah.
because I think if you just soften that stance by the slightest amount, I think it all of a sudden
Yeah.
becomes so much more palatable, right? If you take that hardcore, the natural world is all we have, period, close the book, we're done, versus kind of what JMike has laid out, which I think is more along the lines of, it seems to be the most likely answer that explains the most things and has the least amount of baggage with it. And I think when you put it in that kind of phrasing, honestly, it doesn't really sound like you're committed to that much, right? Like, it seems like a pretty reasonable position. It's like, hey, we only accept the things that we have really solid evidence for. And that seems to stack up on this side of the scale way more, if not entirely exclusively, than the other side, right? And so it's not something that I think either of us would be completely against changing, but the bar to change that position, I think, should be kind of high, because like we said, it seems to be the case, all of our evidence is stacking up on this one side, you know?
Yeah, and what I want to do is like point out to like somebody that you could look at an electron or something and say, well, I don't think it's natural in my view, or I think it's part natural and part not. That the whole point about the kind of comparison is to go, okay, well, let's take what we're accepting. You don't think it's natural. Even if I do it for the sake of the argument, I'm just taking on the burden of the naturalist. I say, well, I'm just going to take it that's this one ontology. That's all we have. And we compare that. If we both agree at this principle, that if we can commit to as little as possible in our hypothesis or our theory, and by theory, I don't mean like scientific theory, just a metaphysical theory of armchair kind of thinking here. If we're gonna have something that makes the most sense, we should be committed to the least as possible that explains all the data. And I think we can show this because if secular goes, well, actually, I hold the principle that I want more things in my view that explains the data, then me and him will just battle each other out. Like, well, I have 2 gods and you have 3 gods and 4 gods. And that's gonna become like a cartoon show where it's like, that's all folks, right? When their 22 minutes are up and we got commercial time, right? So, you know what I mean? So I feel confident that people agree with this kind of idea, that simplicity of the theory, the commitments you get that end up allowing for this huge explanatory breadth and depth. If rarity is like, well, I believe in this thing, the natural world, but also this divine realm and angels and stuff like that, I'm looking at him. You know, TSA lets me go by, but they see his bag and they're like, whoa, hold on. You're not getting on the plane yet. I got to check that, you know? And that's kind of all my view. It's just abductive. It's very similar to history. You know, if we find more data in history, we do archaeological digs, then we can make different probabilistic assessments.
Yeah.
So,
Any of that?
That clicks.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have? No, go ahead. I mean, we're gonna.
So what counts as what counts? Or sorry, what counts as a simplistic? What counts as a simplistic theory?
That's a good question. It's going to be a lot of factors. So I'm going to take that if you have a lot of axioms are you familiar with axioms? Like kind of like unjusted presuppositions that you have. It's kind of like an assumption, right? Or a presupposition that you have that isn't justified. Axioms by definition just aren't justified, right? And so we all,
sorry.
Yeah, pretty much that kind of go into our theory. And when we do our axiomatization, if I'm saying that right, when we do that and we lay all that out, my claim is that the simpler theory is the one that has least amount of axioms, least amount of ideological commitments, ontological commitments, predicates. And what I mean by that is like terms. Like you have to define like a divine realm. I have none of that in my view. I don't have to worry about defining these predicates or terms, right? And showing that they refer to reality. So since I don't have to do all that, at least in that view, when I'm looking at those two views, I'm going, this one's simpler, has less axioms. You could have just God, right? Just this one thing that explains all things. but that's not right. That's not going to be an interesting hypothesis. In the sense that it's going to explain anything you want it to. Well, why does this thing exist? Because of this thing, right? And it's not really going to, not going to really be explaining the data. It's going to be creating like a panacea, right? Where you can just create whatever you want.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? That's kind of what I want to view on simplicity there.
Okay, one more thing.
Sure, no, it's cool. It's fine. Yeah. And secular, feel free. I'm hogging this whole thing.
So, no, it's fine. It's fine. You're doing great, honestly. I've got maybe one example, but sure. I hear what you got to say, Rogue, and then we'll see if it still applies.
Secular rarity. How dare you? The trash, as you can clearly see, the trash bag has a designer.
Right.
But it's not a designer. Therefore, we're designed. Get it right.
That's pretty fair. That's pretty fair, honestly, Rogue. So just real quick before we let you go and grab some of these other good calls, but the thought that comes to my mind when you had asked JMike about like what makes a theory simpler, what makes an answer less complicated and stuff. The example that comes to my mind is something you're probably familiar with. I know a bunch of our audience is, where you are debating with somebody where you really, really disagree. And a lot of times it's that big God claim, right? Mm-hmm. And then they start doing that thing where they go, yeah, but how do you know this? And how do you know that? And what they do is they break down your understanding until it's that very most basic axioms that JMike was just talking about. And what happens there is we get to that point where the theist goes, oh, you don't know that you're not a brain in a vat. Therefore, my claim and your claim are on the same level. And that's not true, because we're both using that same axiom of assuming that we're not brains in a vat. Neither of us have good demonstration or justification. And so now we have to step further.
Yep.
And then if my next step is that's everything for me, and your next step is another unjustified assumption, I win. That's how the game is played.
And you can do this with the brain in a vat scenario. This is like, I'm not saying I can deductively prove that I'm not a brain in a vat, but I'm going to take the same argument that I have against theism for the not God world or philosophical naturalism or whatever. The same thing applies. I think naturalism is a simpler commitment than a brain in a vat plus, like, because you just asked this question, like, why did I have this experience rather than another experience in the brain in a vat? And we don't really get an answer, right? There's like no clear answer why I got this experience rather than another. So it becomes brutally contingent. And by brutally contingent, I mean brute being like, that's it. We have run up against explanation. We've run out, but it's like contingent. Whereas if like me and secular rarity are like, well, I have like these neural processes and there's a tree in front of me. There's an explanation why I see, a fucking tree rather than a rhinoceros,
because it's actually there.
And so, it just seems that when we do this comparison, it's like, I mean, granted, I can't, extreme skeptic, I can't deductively prove this scenario false, but what I can do is provide a justification by saying that doing this comparison and saying, look, I think that I win with more theoretical virtues and less vices than your theory. And I could be wrong, but that's why I like this discussion, because the person who wants to have this dialectic can potentially convince me. And now we have a principle we agree upon. I don't know why I'm holding my mouse in front of me, but a principle we can agree upon where we can make progress. And we both realize we're in the pursuit of truth, and we agree to a similar type of, as humble as we can be about it, because we have to realize we're doing armchair philosophy. Right. And that's like the best we're really going to do. So that's just my view. That's it. So, if anybody's interested in this, just philosophy's full of this type of these theoretical comparisons and stuff. So it's not like I've invented any of this. I've heavily lifted this.
A lot of people have been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah. So, but I think it's a good thing to justify beliefs.
I was interested. I like philosophy, but I don't know. I feel very lazy because I'm pretty sure the first thing in a philosophy class is hard solipsism, and I have yet to look it up.
That's all right. You got a lot of time, and the good
Yeah.
news is these days, Rogue, you know, the ability to come across this information is so much easier. And you know, again,
Yeah.
that's why we, you know, people like JMike and I, and you know, we love doing this stuff, is because 20 years ago there wasn't a succinct 5-minute breakdown of JMike explaining why it makes more sense in his view to choose this as opposed to this, like what the difference between the ontological commitments and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, 100 years ago, my gosh, if you didn't find the exact paper talking about that, you know, you were just screwed. And that's a good place to be, because what that means is that you have a lot of knowledge out there that you can gain and can help you make better and better decisions. And the only way that we know that is in those moments where we start off with, oh crap, I don't know this. Oh gosh, I don't know this. I need to look further into it. And that's okay. That's a fine place to be.
Yeah, and Rogue, we appreciate the call. We're gonna. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for talking. Thank you for talking with me and laughing with me and stuff.
Yeah,
sure.